So you're here because you are interested in getting your midsection makeover, I guess. That's what it is. At least the title is called Midsection Makeover. Now, I have this secret I want to share first, and it's about your midsection. If you're here to get a six pack, you already have it. That's the beautiful thing. It's actually existing right there. Now, you may not be able to see it because chances are, if you don't see it, it's because you have a surplus of calories that your body has been storing for the winter or for a rainy day or for whatever case. And we just need to use up those stored energy supplies in order for you to start to see what is below the surface. So I guess and I'm not trying to be funny necessarily. I guess there's a side to it, but truly, it's not like you're missing your abdominal wall, and those abdominal muscles that connect your rib cage to your pelvis, they're there. They may be in a different state. Could they be weaker, stronger, more defined? There's a whole bunch of things like that. Yes, they could. But if you're really looking for definition and getting your abdominal muscles to give you that washboard as we get closer to the nicer weather, and before you know it, spring's around the corner, and then the summer bikini season and bathing suit season starts off. So it's a good thing to start here if that's what you're looking for. But in truth, you could do a tremendous amount of exercises every day. And yes, you would get abdominals very strong, but in regards to the definition, you're not going to see it until you change your eating. It's just that simple. Yes, exercise, eat right, that whole thing comes back to the basics. But if you're looking to get more defined abdominals, you have to really look at what you're putting in your body, not what you're putting on your body. So a lot of people that I ask, hey, what's your eating like? One of the first things they say is, oh, I eat very healthy. And I say, well, that's fantastic. I'm glad you eat organic, whole foods. And, oh, yes, I eat that all the time. Great. They don't tell me about the other things that they're eating or that they're doing in the evening or the portion that they are consuming either. So it's great that you eat whole, organic, seasonal foods and so on. And if you're plant-based diet, or if you're lacto-ovo vegetarian, complete vegan, or you're omnivorous, that's all well and good. It just really comes down to calories in versus calories out. If you're putting the right calories in, well, that's going to be fantastic, especially if they are low-calorie foods like the fruits and vegetables, especially leafy greens and that type of thing. Consume most of those. And if you want some little kind of helpful hints, before we get on to exploring the abdominals and movements and so on, I would recommend eating off of a smaller plate, like a salad plate. Dinner plates have grown in America. In fact, the flatware has changed over the years so that now, even when you go to restaurants or when we used to dine in, they would have these tremendous platters in which you would be scoffing down your food. So it's easy to put larger portions on larger plates. But if you want to control your portion size, then start with smaller plates. It doesn't mean that you can't go back and have seconds or thirds or whatever, but at least start off by having a little bit more control on your portions. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm a movement guy, and that's what we're going to get into, is understanding the role that the abdominals play, how we're missing part of the story of the abdominals when it comes to our modern way of looking at exercise and trying to firm up the midsection. So my whole thing for this talk is not about definition. It's not about getting you all ripped and svelte for the bikini season. If that happens, that's phenomenal, that's wonderful. But my primary purpose here is to explore movement and how do we get the abdominals and the midsection to behave the way it was designed to behave. So the first 20 minutes of our meetups, which are usually the first Saturday of every month, just so you know, the first 6 months out of the year are 6 different topics. So from January to June, each month is a different topic, and then I repeat those same 6 topics for the second half of the year. So if you missed out on one and you don't go to YouTube or you don't go here or there, you can still have a live kind of back and forth interaction with myself. So February is midsection makeover. That means July, it's going to come again. Perfect time for the beach season. But the abdominals, let's just start there. Your abdominal muscles, they have this ligament that separates the left from right side. And there's bunches or groupings or bundles of muscles that are also separated by ligamentous fascia tissue, a whole bunch of tissue in your body that separates bundles of muscles. Now, the muscle itself attaches to the fifth, sixth, seventh lower ribs here in the rib cage, and they come down in a triangular manner, and they attach to the pubic bone right in the front of my pubis or my pelvis. It's a few inches down from my belly button. Now, when we think of improving our muscular strength of the abdominals, we are always thinking about laying on our back and doing sit-ups or crunches. These days, a lot of people are doing planks because the plank is kind of like this suspension bridge. You've got your hands or elbows at one end and either your knees or toes at the other end, and your body weight is suspended between those 2 points, like the Golden Gate Bridge. And you need some type of support system so that the middle of that bridge doesn't collapse down. And so we do planks thinking that this is going to be great for my abdominals. That is partly true. The abdominals should engage when we do a plank because the pelvis is dropping away from the rib cage. So the points where the abdominals connect to the ribs and the pelvis are going to be pulled apart unless those muscles contract and hold us firmly in place with the plank. Now, if a muscle is used to being lazy, shall we say, like not working as hard and as frequently as it should, what is the likelihood that that muscle is going to change its behavior instantly once you put it into a kind of a threatening situation where the ribs and pelvis move apart? Now, yes, it'll probably engage a little bit, but how hard and how long will it hold that position? Chances are it's not going to hold for very long. So other muscles are most likely going to come into play to support that position of the plank that we're talking about. One muscle in particular that is often in a shortened state, that is shortened right now as I sit here, is your hip flexor muscles. Now, the one in particular I'm thinking of is called your psoas muscle. It's spelled with a P, a silent P at the beginning of the word, P-S-O-A-S. The psoas muscle attaches your thigh bone to the front of your lower back and almost goes all the way up to the inside back portion of the rib cage along the spine. So the thoracic spine is your mid back, and then that turns into the lumbar spine of your lower back. So the psoas muscle attaching to your thighs comes up and attaches not only to the vertebrae of the lumbars, but actually attaches to the discs that are those jelly donuts that give cushioning in between the bony vertebrae of your spine. So those muscles that are attaching to the spine and to your thighs actually do a lot of the work in the plank so that the lower back and the legs don't come apart. So the hip flexors hold the spine kind of in place while the thigh stays where it should, and then the abdominals connecting between the ribs and the pelvis are feeling like, oh, okay, somebody else is here to help. And actually, they're used to helping. They're doing a lot more work, and more often than not, they're really overstimulated, and that puts them in a weakened state, but at the same time, it's pulling on the back. So if you are one person who's been trying planks and your lower back bothers you afterwards, could it be that your abdominals aren't really doing what they should be doing, and your hip flexors are taking over and they're overwhelming the ability to maintain your spine in its position, and now that lower back is getting compressed because the weight of your body is sinking downward? It happens a lot. So considering the abdominals, let's think about what their role is. So this is going to be a participation kind of segment here, and you're going to feel what your abdominals do when you're actually standing on 2 feet. Well, now, compared to when you're getting out of bed in the morning, which is usually just one repetition out of the day, You have to curl and crunch yourself up off the mattress. Or if you're playing with kids on the floor and they tackle you to the ground, you're laying on your back, you have to pull yourself off the ground. And yes, you're pulling a lot with your abdominals. But how often do you find yourself throughout the day lying on your back on a regular basis? No. More often than not, we're standing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put my chair aside a little bit here, and I'm just going to get on both feet. And first, what might be a good idea is if we just check in with the state of your abdominals and your midsection. And the way I want to do that is by getting a sense of where my pelvis is as I stand here, as well as where my rib cage is when I stand here. Now, these are going to be very subtle kind of moves or positions that your body is going to be exhibiting. However, any subtle variation out of our proper balanced aligned position is going to place more muscles in a lengthened state or a shortened state and get us kind of out of balance. So let's consider from a profile your pelvis, which is basically your waistband here. So is your pelvis feeling like it's level? Does it feel like the backside is tucking under? Or do you get a sense that the front side is tilting downward? Where would you say that your pelvis is positioned? Is it more forward? Is it more back? Or is it right in the center? Now, remembering that the abdominals attach my ribs to my pubic bone here in my pelvis, if I found that my pelvis was level, then my muscles here are in a pretty good lengthened position. If I felt like my tailbone's tucking under and the front of my pelvis almost lifting up, you would find that these muscles are in a shortened state. Think of it like almost like your lungs. If this is always in a shortened state, it doesn't get the experience to open up and breathe. So these muscles really are restricted in their ability to circulate, to lengthen, to shorten. They stay in kind of a fixated position, which is going to be really hard to try and work muscles that don't want to open up. On the opposite side, we have those that might feel like their pelvis is tilted forward a little bit. Maybe you're feeling like your lower back is always kind of tight or compressed, like you don't feel like there's a lot of space there. Because that is what's happening when the pelvis tilts forward, your lower back can get very compressed. At the same time, these 2 points begin to move apart. So I look like Uncle Phil that had too many Budweisers maybe, and I got that beer gut going on. Tilting back here, leaning back, and you got that belly going on. You would often see it with women that are expecting children, of course, too, because we need to make that space there. So that whole abdominal wall has to stretch out. And if I'm constantly in this position, and this is my normal way of being, what does that tell us about the abdominal wall? It's in this lengthened position that doesn't really understand or have the capacity to go back into a shortened, more natural resting place where my pelvis is nice and level. Okay, so we know that where your abdominal wall is now is either just right, like Goldilocks, it's too long, too short, or it's just right. What we're going to try and do is get it to be just right, and we're going to try and excite all those muscles during the session to give you an understanding of how do I properly get these muscles to do what they're supposed to do in my world. And in so doing, I might find that my shoulders are become in a better place and they don't feel as impinged or cranky. Or maybe by leveling off, my neck begins to relax because it's not being forced into a position because the rib cage is going one direction or the other. Or I might actually feel like my lower back is getting better too, which is often the case when you go see somebody like a doctor or chiropractor or physical therapist, and you say, I have a problem with my lower back. What do? I want you to do crunches and planks. Because the idea is if we stimulate this area, it will release that area. And many times it works. But we're going to take it one step further. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. Put your fingers on your little midsection here and feel the muscles Some of us have to dig in a little deep. Others have to be right on the surface. Wherever they are, it's a beautiful place. You're a wonderful person. Don't judge yourself. Just know that you've got muscles here. That's wonderful. Maybe there's just a little bit more of you that you want to have, and you can do something about that again with your diet. So, feeling those midsection muscles here, those abdominals, and you might be able to feel the ridges of muscles like going like the washboard. Now, here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to crunch while you're standing up. And that means I want you to curl your body forward. And as you do that, feel what happens to those muscles. They relax. Those muscles are actually not really working very much. Can you feel that? Okay, and then let's go in the opposite direction, but be careful of your lower back. If you've got some back issues, don't do a super back bend. Just a little bit lean backwards. What happens to your muscles now here as you lean backwards? Do you feel how they engage and they suddenly become more taut? Ah, so the abdominals, when you're on both feet, actually are going to control how far back you lean. And in order for them to shorten, they bring us back up to a balanced place. So if I start leaning forward, it's not my abdominals that are pulling me into this place. It's my lower back that is controlling me from falling on my nose right now. My lower back muscles are getting longer, but they're almost like somebody with a rope and a pulley up there, just starting to slowly lower you to the ground. And then as you come back up from here, it's almost like those muscles are shortening and bringing you back up to a straight position. So we can also include those muscles on the side, which are your external and internal obliques, internal and external obliques. So we've got internal obliques that kind of come across in a diagonal fashion, and we've got external obliques that come up and down. So when I lean over to one side, do you feel how the muscles on the side here get tight? They turn on. And then in order for me to get back up here, they have to shorten and draw me up. If I go too far, now this side turns on as it lengthens and contracts and pulls me back up to where I want to go. So now we're talking about these muscles not actually shortening to crunch me into places, but actually contracting to allow me to go over here or over there. That's their role when we're standing upright. Now, when we're laying down, it's a different world. We start getting into all of those ab lab exercises that you're probably all quite familiar with, whether they're the old fashioned sit ups, the crunches, the side crunches, the dying bugs that you might get in a Pilates class where your arms and legs are going in different directions. There's a whole bunch of those movements. It's not to say that they're bad by any stretch. They're actually quite wonderful movements. They have a tendency to isolate areas, and they train the muscles to do one thing, and that's train you to get off the floor. However, we're going to do the other side of the equation. We're going to flip the coin over, and we're going to train the muscles as they are responsible for keeping you on both feet. I know several people in the audience have concerns about their balance. Well, imagine if these muscles aren't controlling your ability to manage your mass over your feet and they're not turning on the way they should, what does that say about the quality of your balance? We can just do simple balance exercises by standing on one leg and reaching out or reaching in different directions and doing a whole bunch of fun games like that while balancing on one leg. That'll be fine for your balance, but there's more to it than that. If we get this corset, this muscular area that wraps around connecting ribs to pelvis into a much more active and balanced state, and it's going to help your posture. It's going to help your balance. It's actually going to help your digestion. Because imagine if these muscles are more contracted here, these muscles are going to be more open. What is the flow of energy, food, blood, and so on in an area that's going to be more compressed? Probably not all that great. So as we start to wake up certain areas in that midsection, we might actually find that more than just pain diminishes in the lower back. We might find that there's a little bit better elimination. There may be a little bit better digestion. You might actually find that you're breathing better. Because if I am tucked under here and tucked down here, and I'm walking around like I'm ready for a Miami residence hall, then, then what's that going to mean for my ability to take a deep breath? I'm not going to be able to. And therefore, there's more stress on my cardiovascular system, which is going to tax my heart. So this goes into more than just jumping in a bathing suit. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to get into some movements. And for right now, all you're going to need is your own body weight. And we will go to the floor because I find that those are fun movements to kind of explore. But we'll do it in maybe a different fashion than you're accustomed to. But for now, I want to see if I can communicate my midsection down into my hips and up into my arms. So what we could do is we could try and work on lengthening this tissue here in different positions. And what you might find is that you'll feel those muscles turning on but lengthening at the same time. Now, because we have two halves of our abdominals and there's a ligament going down the middle, we might find that one side is going to do a little bit more work when, say, I tilt to the side or rotate to one side. And that's okay because that's how muscles should be working. It's not kind of all or nothing. If both sides contract, that's where we get into forward motion or backward control or crunching off the ground. But instead, we're going to start by just exploring a little bit of movement. All right, I'm going to lower the camera down just a little bit so you can see a little bit more full portion of my body. I'm going to turn just a little bit so you can have like a 3/4 or quarter turn, a viewpoint. I'm going to take one leg, this one being my right foot. I'm going to step forward with my right, and I'm going to keep my left leg back behind me. As moving creatures across the planet, we'll often find that we move one leg in the complete opposite manner that we move the opposite leg. For instance, as I have my right leg forward, you'll see that my right ankle is bent, my knee is bent, and my hip is bent. But here, my hip is open, my knee is straight, and I've got my heel off the ground, so I'm pushing away with my foot. So I've got two opposite positions. That's what I'm looking for. What I'm going to do is feel how my pelvis tilts forward a little bit as I get onto this forward leg. And can I get the weight over my forward leg by bringing my body on top of it? And now you already might begin feeling this leg start to get excited and work. Now, in this position, that forward hip here on my right side is ever so slightly higher, or at least should be higher on my right than my left. So I'm going to encourage a little bit more out of my midsection by taking the opposite arm of my forward leg, and I'm just simply going to lift it upward. Then I'm going to take my other arm, my right arm, with the palm up, I'm just going to draw it back around behind me. And then I'm going to come on back. We'll try this maybe 3 times. Allowing that rib cage to rotate with the arm as it travels right. Be sure that the knee of that right leg just stays right over the foot and it doesn't roll along for the ride. Let's switch sides now. Left leg forward, right leg back. Now my left hip should be higher than my right. That gives my rib cage a need to lean over to my left side. I'm going to encourage that a little bit more by taking my right arm upward. And with my left arm, same side as my forward leg, I'm going to again draw that back. And then come forward. Now, of course, this is going to be a different sensation than doing 1,000 crunches. Let's go one more. Because you're not going to get that isolated, burning, kind of tearing up sensation that you might get if you went to some aerobic class and they spent an hour just on the floor doing all these kind of crunches. What we're doing is we're trying to actually do something greater than just build a burn. We're actually creating a communication or a relationship with your abdominals, with the rest of your body and how it moves. so that when you do go out and move on a regular basis, provided you're rehearsing and kind of re-educating your system, that these muscles are going to actually be involved more often than they had been before we began this. Okay, so we have that going on. We've got a little bit of extension and flexion off to one side and rotation. So you just gave your abdominal muscles in three-dimensional space an experience of opening up, but at the same time turning on. So hopefully that felt pretty nice to you. Now we can do this same movement or similar movements with a little added resistance while we're standing up. So what I have is just a rubber band, and I've anchored it, as you can see, almost to the height of a doorknob, maybe a little bit more than that. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to position myself with my feet parallel, and I'm going to take both hands, and I'm just going to try to keep my head directly over my tailbone or my pubic bone here. And can I pull this band across to the front of my body? I can go further if I really want to, but right now I'm just looking to the point where can I get these muscles engaged in my midsection? And there's very easy ways to not allow that to happen, especially if they're not accustomed to it. One is I could use my legs a lot more and really turn with my hips, and that would take away the work from the abdominals. I could use my arms and just pull across, and I wouldn't have any rotation going on. And in fact, these muscles are pretty relaxed right now as I just use my arms. So this is where awareness of movement really comes into play. You've got to be aware of how your body is moving. So check in. If you happen to have a resistance band nearby, that's wonderful. If not, don't worry about it. If you happen to have somebody with you, what they could do is simply push against your hands as you're holding them here. They could be standing beside you and just pushing against the hands as you try to bring them across. The key here is to try not to use your arms. And the way to do that is by keeping those arms straight. Now, I'm currently using both arms, and you'll see my feet are not too wide, because if they're wide, they're going to take away work from here also. I'm going to bring them in as narrow as I can, yet still be successful with the movement, and I'm simply going to pull across. If I pull with my outside arm across, then that's going to excite a lot of the muscles around my waist toward the backside for the most part. If I take the arm closest to the anchor point and come across, that's really going to affect here, but also come up into my chest and in my biceps. So the reason why I hold on with both arms is to try and get all that area to get excited. And of course, I'm pulling from the right across to the left. What you could do is turn around, or if you happen to have a rubber band on the other side, you could try the same thing, pulling in the opposite direction. Now, the standing rotation, if you happen to be a tennis player or a golfer, or if you just like throwing ball with your grandchild or your kids, then this could actually be a very functional practice for you so that you are not overworking the shoulder or the elbow, the neck or the lower back, which are common areas that you're going to hear about when people play a lot of tennis or a lot of golf. Golfer's elbow and tennis elbow, which, by the way, next month, we'll be addressing that. But so far, we've just done a couple of things, and it involves some rotation. Now, what we could also do is simply work on a little bit of back bending in a way. And what we can do is have you in a stance that is a split stance, and you're going to take your hands and you're just going to reach back behind you and come overhead. Can you feel these muscles turn on? But can you do it in a way where you're not compressing your lower back? That's the tricky one with this. We could have a parallel stance with your legs, and we could be going back and coming forward. We just have to go to a point where you can tolerate that movement and that you're not feeling pain in different areas. If you are feeling pain, just put that movement aside for right now. It could be that your body's just not ready for that movement because of the position it finds itself in. And that by doing the other movements, who knows, that might alleviate the pain that you just felt from that action. All right, so we have that simple motion there, and you notice that as I came across, I spoke of one arm at a time. Well, what if we just incorporated the rubber band again, and instead of having the band off to our side and pulling across, that it was behind you? So if I take that rubber band once more, and I'm going to have my feet parallel to start with, and I'll talk to you a little bit about foot position and how that can affect this area to make it easier or harder. I can simply just take my arm and press outward. What I'm trying to do here, though, is I want to make sure that my body is fairly upright as I press forward. I don't have to go all the way out till my arm is straight. All I'm doing is trying to achieve some resistance that feeds into my midsection. If I lean over, remember what happens to the abdominal muscles. They turn off, they relax. So when you're doing these kind of movements and you're leaning over and you're trying to push as hard as you can, it's no longer an abdominal exercise. It's not hitting your midsection. You're really just doing a chest or arm and shoulder movement. So the important thing here is to find a place that you can be nice, tall, and upright and apply forward action with the resistance band behind you. Of course, we can switch arms and do the same thing and see what the other side feels like. You may very well notice that one arm, one side, is slightly different than the other. It's good that we do both sides. However, you may want to focus a little bit more of your attention on the side that is more challenged so that we can try and bring them up to a nice level playing field. All right. Now, the leg position I spoke of, we did a parallel position. But if I want to make it a little bit easier, I can step back with my opposite leg. So with my right hand holding the band, I would have my right leg forward. This allows my pelvis to turn away into the left, which is exactly where my rib cage has to go when the arm goes forward. It's easier for the abdominals to allow the ribs and the pelvis to move in the same direction. Now, if I simply bring that leg forward, now the pelvis is not going to be rotated to the left or to the right, but it's going to face forward. Now the rib cage, when I'm extending out, has this tendency to rotate on top of the pelvis, making it a little bit harder for my abdominals to pull the rib cage above the hips and pelvis. Then I can take it to another degree of intensity where my opposite leg is forward. Having my left leg forward is going to turn my pelvis in your direction, but as I extend outward, my rib cage is going to want to rotate away from you, creating this opposition between the ribs and the hips, making it that much more intense for my midsection. So just one of those rules of thumb, if you're doing kind of movements, whether it's a standing single arm press like this, or if it's a movement where you're pulling across the body, having the opposite leg forward is going to make it much more intense. Now, I could take the legs a little bit out of it by simply going down onto one knee. I could be both knees parallel. I can have the same leg forward, making it easier, or I can get into the opposite leg forward, making it even more intense, because now I don't have my legs to necessarily help me out. So therefore, I've got to get the movement from somewhere, and I'm going to ask my abdominals to give me even more. Now we can feel all those muscles kicking on around there. How many I do, you could play around with the repetitions and sets. Just know if we're looking to excite this area, we're looking for them to be first energized, activated. You want to feel these muscles turning on. And then can you get it to a point where the form maintains itself while you feed resistance into it? As soon as your form starts breaking down, well, you've lost the capacity to maintain proper movement, and therefore you're just putting an improper pattern and reinforcing it into your body. So I would not recommend going any further. If you start to feel that you're faltering in form, stop. You've gone to that point. Okay. So we have ourselves standing exercises. The other thing I didn't add to that is, well, you could get it even more intense simply by balancing on one leg and trying to do that. You won't have the leverage with your feet, therefore you probably won't need as much resistance. But if you wanted to try and increase your balance and your core strength at the same time, yes, you could do it on a single leg balance. So those are some basic ones of working. Now, I only used one arm. I guess I could do the opposite movement, which is a pulling action. In this pulling action, I'm going to take that rubber band and draw it toward me. And as that arm goes back, my rib cage will rotate toward you. With the opposite leg forward this time, I actually have the hips turning toward you as well, so it makes this one a little bit easier. I could bring my feet parallel, which would make it more demanding on those muscles wrapping around the obliques, the abdominals, and the lower back muscles, all of them. Or I could go same leg forward as my pulling arm, which would turn my hips and pelvis away from you, so that when I pull and my rib cage rotates toward you, it is the most opposition we're going to get. So therefore, it's going to be the most demanding on our midsection. So it's kind of the opposite of pressing. With pressing, I want my opposite leg forward for the highest intensity. But for pulling, I want my same side leg forward for the most intensity. Pretty cool. All right. Now, we have medicine balls that we can use. And as you can see over here, we've got those domes that are inflatable called Bozus, and we can use those too. And I think I will pull one of those out near the end just to show you what maybe doing a floor crunch where you'd benefit even to a greater degree if you were going to be using a device like that. But let's just say that I have two rubber bands and I want one arm to press forward while the other one pulls. So we are encouraging the rib cage to basically turn on top of the hips. So if I brought back this rubber band and I put it like so, and I walked forward and grabbed the other rubber band, I could have my feet parallel with my knees softly bent, and as this arm presses forward, the other arm's going to draw inward. If you've got a stiff neck, by the way, little footnote, keeping your head level and still while your shoulders and rib cage rotate underneath it may be a really nice gift for all those muscles that kind of are locked up. They'll be able to experience what lengthening and shortening is like, and you might just awaken that area. Of course, I can turn around and I can do the same thing to the opposite side. We can hold true with the same concepts of leg position, so that if I want a little bit more intensity, I could have my same leg forward of my pulling arm, which is the opposite leg forward of my pressing arm. This is going to get me the most intense action in my midsection. And what you'll hopefully see is that I'm not letting my head go forward or backwards, but it's staying in one location as I drive my arms back and forth. If I wanted to make it a little easier, my feet are parallel. If I wanted to make it more manageable than that, then I just switch so the same leg of my pressing arm is my forward leg now. And there we have it. So having a couple rubber bands, or if you have a cable system, if your facility where you exercise is available for you to go in, you can have those functional trainers where the cables come out and the arms go in different directions. You can hold on to those handles, and you can do the same thing with the proper weight stack. Okay, so far so good. Probably not exactly what you're expecting, which I think is kind of cool because I didn't want to meet anybody's expectations. I'd rather shake the tree and see what kind of dead fruit falls out in terms of our old concepts and waves of thought. But we should look at floor exercises. What are we going to do? Because we just did a whole bunch of balancing or standing exercises. I didn't even include stepping up and down on a box while using a band. So we can start to add elements to those basic movements of pulling across the body, driving away from the body, or pulling toward the body. And we can have a different environment in which we could be working with. I could have been squatting. I could have been lunging. I could have been doing a whole bunch of various movements on a box or a step. And that just adds another component of complexity to trying to get these areas to work in a different fashion. But let's go to the floor. In fact, let's use that Bozu because it has a purpose when it comes to really working that midsection. All right. If you're fortunate enough to have one of these overpriced devices, that's great. If you don't, well, you know, a couple of bedroom pillows might work pretty well too. Here we go. So I've got this dome here. And the nice thing about that dome shape is my back, my spine can conform to that. I can extend over it while I'm laying on it. And what's going to happen to my abdominal muscles? If you recall, when I extend back, those muscles turn on because they're preventing me from falling any further backwards. They're contracting to keep me here, and they must shorten to pull me back to this position. So let's use that in our favor. We're just simply going to have our hips slightly off the dome so that my lower back and my mid back can lay near the top of the apex of it. And just to support the 8 to 10 pounds of head weight, I'm just going to allow my body to roll on top of the Bozu so that my head just about touches the ground. I don't know about you, but that feels kind of nice to get that stretch. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm only going to bring myself back to a straight position. I could go further, maybe a little higher, but really what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from a neutral position into an extended position and feel how those muscles turn on. And then just come up to there. So when it comes to crunches, it's not my number one exercise by any stretch. However, if we are going to want to do crunches, more often than not, I really like this way of doing it because it allows the abdominals to go beyond the straight line of the floor and actually lengthen into a place where it doesn't get to experience that motion very often. And of course, you can have variations to that simple action as well. You could have some type of rotation where you're coming up as you're curling off the ground out of that extended position. You could raise one leg. You could have resistance bands where I might have the resistance bands anchored down to the floor and I might press upward. And to encourage more flexion, that's fine. I might turn my arms inward and then come back out. There's a bunch of ways in which we can rename or redo the crunch itself, but using the dome really gives you a different range of motion that I don't think being on the floor is really going to provide. So the other thing on the floor we mentioned at the beginning were planks. Okay. First of all, is your spine one bone? No, of course not. Your spine is not one bone. And yet, for many of these midsection exercises, we have been told that we want to brace and we want to keep this area locked down. Brace and hold it or push it in or bring the belly button back to the spine and just everything just hold there. When in fact, there's 26 bones that make up your spine. We've got 5 lumbar, 12 thoracic, 7 cervical. That makes 24. You include the sacrum and the coccyx, there's your 26. And each of those have a certain ability to move, like a stack of cups on the waiter's tray of your pelvis. It can flex side to side. It can rotate right and left. It can flex forward and extend backwards. And then it can do a combination of all those movements. So when we are training planks, it's okay to maintain a static position, but what about dynamic movement while holding yourself in that position? What did we do when we were infants? As soon as we learned how to roll over, we got up and we started rocking, which in truth is a fantastic movement in itself, especially if you've got some low back issues. So as if you're in that crawling position, you're an infant, what if you just began your morning doing this? Now, it's not a midsection exercise, but what it does do is it really opens up that lower back. It gets your knees and hips warmed up, and it's a great way to go before you actually start moving through the world, which infant-wise, the next thing they did was they started crawling, which is another fantastic exercise to stimulate this whole area. Can you crawl around with your head up off the ground, looking to where you want to go, having one arm and opposite leg lift off the ground at the same time? Next on to that, can you do it with your knees off the ground, head up, and moving back and forth? This is connecting the shoulder to the opposite hip, and every muscle in between those 2 points are going to have to do something in order for you to crawl. At least they're going to be encouraged to do that. So crawling is fantastic, which is a condensed way of doing a plank, if you think about it. Now we can go to a broader length of the body, and instead of being on your hands and knees, or with your knees bent and knees off the ground, we can actually straighten out the legs. So now the body weight is really having to be supported through the hands and the feet. And if I don't keep certain muscles active, I'm just going to collapse down. But how wonderful of a movement is that? That's almost a yoga pose, isn't it? And then what's the next thing they do in yoga? They push their butt back into the air. So what if we did a plank where you controlled your ability to move back and forth? Or what if you glided your hips off to one side and then the other? Or even if you were to rotate the hips down to one side and then to the other. I could even do a circle. I could make figure eights. All of these movements are stimulating this area in such a way that we're giving it a different sensation, and we're not encouraging the hip flexors to do all the work. These muscles are having to extend or lengthen and shorten in any direction I go. I let my hands stay on the ground as well as my feet. But if I were to lift one hand off the ground, I create a tripod, which is a very stable structure, but depending upon where this arm goes, is going to further drive a lot of work into my body. So with my plank position, what if I just imagined I was on a clock and I reached to 12 o'clock or to 6 o'clock, maybe over to 3 o'clock or to 9 o'clock? I could go anywhere. Then I could switch arms and do the same thing. And you notice I'm not trying to keep my body straight and rigid and just do this. I'm really trying to explore, how far can I reach out personally? Where is my range of reach? Because I have a feeling it's going to be different for every person. What if I reached with my leg instead and brought it to anywhere I want to go? Can you see how the rib cage and the hips and pelvis are having to go through three-dimensional movement toward each other and away, almost like you're creating the saltwater taffy of muscle action throughout your body as you make those moves? So there is the midsection makeover. We're going almost like a do-over, really. We're going to put the traditional things into our workout. That's fine. If you want to continue to do your side raises and your crunches and the traditional planks, but I'm going to encourage you to start to explore movement and explore how these ribs and pelvis relate to one another. Can I incorporate movement in my legs or my arms to feed action through these areas? Side bending, rotating, flexing, extending. It's not just this action. Whether you got a chest pad and you're in the gym on a machine in a seated position, or you're hanging from somewhere and you're raising your legs up, or you're crunching on the ground, it's the same movement, isn't it? But what we did today was a completely different area of motion. We did a little bit of this, but it was combined with this, or with this, or with this. So this is the time. Look at that. We've got about maybe 5 to 10 minutes left. It looks like there's a few things on the chat room, so I'll go there first. And then after I've gone through these, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask questions, you're welcome to it. I should mention also I do a couple of podcasts. One is called the Rock Fit Files, and that is all about anatomy and motion and biomechanics and movement. And I talk to colleagues all around the world all about such things, from medical doctors, chiropractors, athletic trainers, physical therapists, or strength coaches like myself. And then another podcast I have, and you can find them on iTunes, Spotify, a whole bunch of different places. The other one's called Zealous Podcast, which is talking to the professionals behind all the pro sports. So athletic trainers, strength coaches, physical therapists, performance and specialists, and so on. Recently had a series of women in the NFL. So all the female coaches in the NFL, I've spoken to them, and episodes are flying around. So sometimes when I first stand up, I feel like I can't fully stand up straight, like I'm leaning forward. All right. Oh, that's great observation, first of all. So there could be a whole bunch of things that are going on for anybody that experiences what I've just read there. Now, let's just consider that, because this is a beautiful topic. Thank you for bringing it up. I have been in this position now, and in the seated position, my hips are what we would call flexed, right? The leg is closer to my midsection. So the muscles that attach to my thigh and to my lower back, that psoas muscle we spoke of earlier, that attach to the lumbar and the discs and so on, they are so used to being short right now. And the longer I stay in this position, the longer they kind of consider this is my normal. This is where we want to be. And the longer I stay here, the more natural this is going to be. And then suddenly, I want to stand up. Well, those muscles are going to say, well, wait a minute. We've been sitting down. I'm awesome at adapting to whatever environment you want. And the longer you keep me in an environment, the better I'm going to be at adapting. And now we've been sitting on our backsides for an hour. And even though he has suggested I get up and move, I just didn't want to, because I was just listening. I was so intrigued and hypnotized by his voice. It was amazing. I didn't want to get up and stand, but now I am. These muscles are just going to go, oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, I kind of still like, I'm kind of used to being short here. So then maybe other muscles are going to have to go, well, if I got to get that head up over the hips and those muscles are kind of locked up, maybe they'll get a little bit longer, but then the lower back goes, oh, no, don't worry, I got it. If I just shorten up and compress that back a little bit more, and then, okay, now I'm walking around, that feels good. Does this is this reminiscent of how you feel when you get out of the chair? So these areas here have gotten so compressed that it's really hard to open back up again. So that one that we did, where you had one leg forward, opposite arm up, same side arm of the forward leg, rotating back around, takes all this tissue and just gives it love. It just gives it some openness, gets it to breathe, gets it to feel what it's like just to release. And then if you do that on both sides, initially when you get up out of the chair and then walk around, see what that feels like. You're probably going to feel a little bit different. Seems like old school straight leg sit-ups are returning in popularity. Are you a fan? Do you like bicycle crunches more than standard crunches due to rotational movements? I think every movement is a wonderful movement. There's no such thing as a bad exercise. It all depends upon the body that is performing it. So therefore, if your body is in such a state where you are already doing maybe kind of some of those movements, maybe doing more of that might not be the best thing. So for a lot of people that sit for a long time, they get into that locked position and then they lay on their backs with their bent knees and they try and crunch themselves deeper into a sit position. Yeah, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say you're not ready for that because you're already living in it every single minute of the day, or as long as you're sitting. So there may be some other movements that would be great. But yeah, I think in terms of the fitness industry, there are often people that will say this is a bad exercise. And it becomes a blanket statement. Never do this one. You should never do straight leg sit-ups. You should never do bicycles. It's bad for you. Well, that's very unfair. If a human movement is bad for you, we shouldn't be able to achieve it. But if the body is in the proper place where movement is fluid and unrestricted, then any movement should be beneficial. Should someone who has piriformis issues do planks and lower abdominal exercises? All right, Erica, I got you in here. So the piriformis, well, it really is kind of an interesting question here. And I typically don't just look at symptoms, but look at how the body moves that creates the symptoms, because sometimes the piriformis is not the trouble. It's just the speaker for what's going on in your body, and it's screaming out because nowhere else is getting your attention. But to your question, should someone who has piriformis issues do planks and lower abdominal exercises? Possibly. It really depends upon the body. I would not necessarily give movements to somebody based on a symptom or a syndrome or a complaint. I would want to see, what is their piriformis really doing? Is the piriformis being pulled apart because we've got that hip internally rotated? Or is it being jammed up and compressed and really tight that way because it's rotating the opposite direction? Is it that the pelvis is a little bit tilted on one side and giving some pressure into that area? So it's really hard to say, to give a complete, concrete answer to your question. What I would say is, can you explore pelvic motion and get your body to feel what it's like to anteriorly and posteriorly tilt, glide left and right, tilt left and right, and rotate left and right? When you do that, what is the piriformis going to have to do? It's going to have to breathe. Again, I like using breathe because that's kind of, when we think about it, it's almost, the muscles move like an accordion almost. They slide and lengthen, they shorten, slide together. And if a muscle is locked up, it's holding its breath. It's stagnant. Nothing is going on there. So can we just get it to get a little pumping action? And when that pumping action occurs, there's circulation. And with circulation comes awareness to nerve endings. And the brain starts waking up going, oh my gosh, there's something there. Oh, we can use that. We've got more access, more ability. So I would say, rather than going for specific movements like the crunches or the planks, let's just first explore what your body can do in regards to how does your pelvis move. Do you talk about keeping the distance between the front lower ribs and the front hip bone static so as not to overdo it in the lower back? Well, again, this depends upon a person, but we should be able to have movement that opposes one another, because if this were my rib cage, this is my pelvis, my abdominal muscles being right here attached here, my lower back muscles being where my thumb is attached to the edge of my palm. When my pelvis tilts underneath me and the tailbone sits down and the rib cage tilts forward like you're doing a crunch, the lower back decompresses, creates space, and opens up. And then when I go into the opposite position and start to tilt my rib cage back as my pelvis tilts forward, then those muscles in the lower back will shorten. If a person is more fixated in one place, then they may find that going in one direction does not feel good. So it really depends upon the person's structure and their ability to move, which will dictate what movements are going to be best suited to get them to a more balanced place where things function better. For shameless self-promotion, I did write a book last year just when COVID broke out. I timed it perfectly, I think, yes. And it's called Return to Center: Strength Training to Realign the Body, Recover from Pain, and Achieve Optimal Performance. And a lot of what we did today, called Return to Center. Hey, look at that. Somebody's in the camera right now. She's got the copy. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Yes. And in that book, there are QR codes that you scan your phone over with your camera, and instantly a YouTube video will pop up based on that movement, that concept, that theory, or whatever. And there's like 150 videos to choose from there. That's also on the YouTube channel that you can kind of peruse through. Even if you don't get the book, you can still get something out of those videos. But there you have it. Hopefully everyone got something out of this. I love doing these things because it just refreshes my memory and makes my axe sharpen, so to speak. And if you did enjoy this, please subscribe. And if you don't mind subscribing to everything we're doing, the YouTube channel, the podcasts, the meetups, and tell your friends, the more the merrier. This has been growing slowly over the course of the last couple of years, and I love seeing new faces. So hopefully we'll see you again. I have to put out one more plug. I will be doing a presentation for a company called Perform Better. Perform Better is an exercise equipment company where we get a lot of our equipment from, but they're educational based also, where they have speakers like myself and other ones that are just the who's who in the fitness industry and rehab industry. And every Tuesday, 11 o'clock Pacific time, 2 o'clock Eastern, there is a free lecture and Q&A, kind of like this. And if you're a trainer, a massage therapist, rehab person, you can actually get continuing education units, I believe, for most of these. Mine will be Tuesday, February 16th, and I'm going to be discussing the role that the feet play in strength training and how to get a stronger body by incorporating more awareness and movement into your feet. So until then, I want to thank you all for coming.